Spider-Man has had a lot of films over the years, but one scrapped 90s movie directed by the one and only James Cameron would have been the wildest Spidey adventure ever. The potential movie would have not only taken the webhead to some pretty dark places story-wise, but also would have featured strange choices for some iconic villains. Can you see Arnold Schwarzenegger's Dr. Octopus?
You serious?
And how adult was Cameron trying to go? We'll go into all that and more right now. Somewhere out there in the multiverse, there's an Earth where James Cameron's 90s Spider-Man movie wasn't cancelled, and I've never been more jealous of another version of myself before. Unfortunately, we're stuck on this Earth, and that means this insane project never saw the light of day. But if you look at how absolutely bonkers this movie was, you'll kind of wish we could have seen it too. Because we all have an idea of the kind of hero Spider-Man is thanks to the 57 reboots and all the comics. But back in the 90s, James Cameron wanted to take the character in a very interesting direction. His proposed story would have seen Peter as a young teenager get bit by a radioactive spider and develop superpowers. Pretty standard, right? But you see, Cameron wanted to do more with that concept. His outline that he wrote made a more direct connection with a teenage Peter developing and understanding his new superpowers, and a teenage boy going through puberty. His body did change drastically after all. And although Cameron's outline might have been a bit too raunchy and adult for your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, the idea behind Cameron's vision is really solid. Seeing Peter struggle with puberty as well as battling supervillains is an aspect of the character we've never gotten to see. Spider-Man's appeal comes from his relatability, and seeing him in such a vulnerable state as he tries to figure out how to handle the changes to his body is something awkward we've all gone through. But what was Cameron's movie actually about? You know, if you take away things like a romance scene where Peter woos Mary Jane by talking about a spider's mating habits, or Peter waking up in a cocoon of his own web fluid, what actually happens in the movie? Well, here's where things get really interesting. Over the course of the 90s, before the project fell apart, there were quite a few different drafts and versions of the overall story, but Cameron's idea was to have the villain of the film be Carlton Strand. If that name doesn't sound familiar, don't worry, but you might recognize his skill set. While running from police, Strand gets into one of those freak accidents that seem to happen a lot in movies, where he gets electrocuted by a lightning field. Surviving the accident, Strand develops electricity powers. Sound familiar? It should. Most of you can deduce that this is a version of the Electro character. But Strand doesn't just become a common villain, he uses his abilities to manipulate bank transfers and the stock market, while dispatching anyone who gets in his way. So by the time the movie starts, Strand's a multi-millionaire and a very influential businessman. But here's the really interesting thing about this villain. He can't touch anyone out of danger of seriously injuring them, which meant he would have spent the film tortured by the fact that although he's rich and powerful, he can't experience intimacy or any true human connection at all. This would have tied in with Peter's arc, as the webhead would be falling in love for the first time in his life with Mary Jane, and having a burning desire to act on his feelings for her. This sets up the hero and the villain on complete opposite sides of the spectrum, and probably would have made for a compelling dynamic. The overall plot of the movie would have seen Strand buy out the Daily Bugle and give J. Jonah Jameson an unlimited budget to bash Spider-Man at every turn. By trying to turn the world against Spidey, Strand would try to influence the young teen to join his cause and basically take over the world. You know, classic dilemma. So overall, this 90s version of Spider-Man would include everything you've come to expect from a Spider-Man film. An Uncle Ben tragedy, a Daily Bugle that hates Spider-Man, an awkward young love, and the whole
"With great power comes great responsibility."
But it would all be packaged under James Cameron's unique and adult-oriented vision.
Sound good?
Yes, sir!
And can you imagine what would have happened if this movie was released in the 90s? What would this have done for Spider-Man and the superhero brand overall? If this movie was a huge success, I could see an alternate future where R-rated superhero movies were more commonplace. And just imagine what the rest of the 90s would have looked like. The Blade series started in 1998 and were moderately successful R-rated movies based on Marvel characters. But if an R-rated Spider-Man was a success, could we have seen a potential Spider-Man and Blade team-up movie? Now that's a wild thought. And if Spidey's first movie was a big hit, of course there would have been sequels. What would those have looked like? Well, it was rumored that Cameron wanted to cast his frequent collaborator Arnold Schwarzenegger as none other than Dr. Otto Octavius in the first movie. It would have been a small part, but ultimately would have set up for a bigger, more villainous role in the sequel. Now I know Arnold has a lousy track record of playing comic book supervillains, but hey, maybe if this 90s Spider franchise got off the ground, Arnold would have played Dr. Octopus instead of Mr. Freeze. So not only would we get an interesting Spidey movie, but also a potentially better Batman movie too? Sounds perfect! Overall though, whatever future Spidey would have had under Cameron would have been much darker. If the first movie succeeded, then Cameron could have really dived into some of Spidey's darkest storylines like Kraven's Last Hunt or anything with Venom or Carnage, and not have them be watered down. That's a cool thought. So although it's unfortunate this movie never got a chance to get made, we should take solace in the fact that its legacy will live on forever. Why, you ask? Well, did you know the organic web shooters that Sam Raimi introduced in his first Spider-Man movie was based on Cameron's original idea? It goes to show that even though Cameron's movie wasn't made, it still had a long-lasting effect on the Spidey character. What do you think? Do you think this would have been a good movie? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to web shoot that subscribe button for more awesome videos like this. Thanks for watching CBR, and keep swinging, my friends.